Hi, I'm Dr. Purves. In this video, I want to tell you how to crack the code that will release you from panic, anxiety, depression, or stress. I also want to make sure you understand how important it is to crack the code, because if you don't crack the code, well, in principle, nothing much is going to change. So, what is the code? I make a distinction between external reality and internal reality. So external reality in principle, right, is the external world. So this is everything that we see, everything we hear, taste, touch, smell, etc. That's external reality. Internal reality is the world that we have inside here. So in principle, you think, well, an element of internal reality would be your imagination. Okay, but actually, your internal reality is a lot more complex. So the first level of encoding is this. All of the information that comes into your system in your brain comes in through your five senses. There is no other avenue for information other than your five senses. I hope that seems reasonable. Touch, taste, sight, smell, hearing. Okay. Now, all of the information that comes into your system through your five senses is encoded. You think you're seeing me on this video. And to a degree you are, but you're also not. What you're actually seeing, or what your eyes are seeing, is reflected light as photons hitting the retina. Now your retina has only three color sensors, which are red, blue and yellow, and of course black and white, so it's the rods and cones. So the photons hit the sensors in the retina. That information goes through the optic nerve, through various relays, etc. So it gets to the back of the brain at the occipital cortex, where your brain reconstructs a version of this external reality. Now, you're unaware of that process. You think, well, I'm just seeing this video. Well, yeah, it feels like that, but you're not. You're seeing the internal reconstruction of this video. I hope that makes sense, because it's critically important that you recognize that your vision is encoded and then decoded. I guess the simplest kind of code would be a Morse code, right? Alphabet is turned into dots and dashes, transmitted through a wire, turned back into alphabet at the other end and read by somebody. That's a code, right? One thing is changed in form and then it's reconstructed back at the other end. So my image on this screen is deconstructed into photons in your eye. That information is passed through electrical signals in the nerves to the occipital cortex, where it's reconstructed back into your kind of image of the world. You think you can hear me speaking. Well, obviously that's your experience, right? But no, the sound waves are moving through the air and they're hitting your eardrums and they make your eardrum vibrate. That creates electrical impulses, which is passed through various relays, and in your auditory cortex, it is turned back into the perception of sound. You don't actually know what I sound like. You know what you think I sound like because of the auditory reconstruction. And in fact, I might sound different to different people, for various reasons, actually. I might have a regional accent, and some people might pick up on that more, and some people might pick up on it less. And so people will think that I sound different, but in principle it doesn't matter much, because we're all running more or less the same kind of brains. You think that you smell things, and in principle you do, but what you actually smell is small, minute particles of the thing that you're smelling, which then contact the olfactory system, and that then creates the impression of a smell. Now, you can more or less only smell things that you've smelt before, or you have some understanding of what the smell is, because otherwise you don't have a library of smells that enables you to understand the smell. Same for taste. You have a limited number of taste sensors of various kinds of things. The information goes from the taste sensor to blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And with touch, now, if I touch something in external reality, let's say my head, because that's the only thing I've got handy. If I touch my head, I might think, well, I'm touching my head. Well, I am, but the touch neurons in my finger are sending electrical impulses down through my arm, into my spinal cord, back up into my brain, and my brain's going, okay, touch activated, hard touch, soft touch. The material it's touching is warm, so all that information is coming back. Now also, my scalp is recognizing that it's being touched, so it's all being combined. But it is all in code. It is all encoded through your senses. Now, nothing I've said is off the wall or anything other than basic, straightforward science. I urge you to check it out for yourself. What does your brain do with this encoded information? That's the point, right? Well, your brain has to reconstruct it, it has to decode it, and it turns it into a virtual reality simulation of the external world. So because everything that comes into your external world is encoded, you don't actually respond to the encoded information, you respond to what your brain reconstructs, decodes in your internal virtual reality simulation. So this is why I make the distinction between external reality and internal reality. And it's internal reality that you respond to. It's internal reality that is far more important to you than the external world. Now, clearly, there's a good match between the external world and the internal world to some degree. Sufficient of a good match for you to be able to drive and walk without bumping into people and, say, yeah, that's red. Yeah, I agree, that's red. We're more or less in agreement. The problem is that your brain also acts as a huge filtering system. So you're bombarded with information all the time. The external world is incredibly complicated, and it's full of sights and sounds, tastes, smells, and everything, right? Incredibly complicated. Your brain functions like a filter. It filters out 90% of all of the information that contacts you, because otherwise you'd be overwhelmed. You wouldn't be able to cope. Too much information of the same kind of information, it's a sunny day outside. Too much information is unnecessary. I just need to know it's a sunny day outside, and basically that's it, right? So information which is not deemed useful is filtered out. Now, some information gets partially processed, but you're not aware of that unless it becomes important to you. The classic experiment is this, and I'll just share it with you. I remember this from my undergraduate days. If you're in a cocktail party, should you ever go to a cocktail party, if you're in a cocktail party and someone way across the room mentions your name, all of a sudden you orient to that because that's a piece of information that's useful. So your brain is partially processing stuff, but not into awareness. It's just a general hubbub. Something that seems important gets in. So your brain filters out much of the information that comes into your awareness or comes into your system generally. How do you know that that filtering system is working well, and how might you know if it's working poorly? So your internal virtual reality simulation, which we're going to call your internal world, relies upon practice, it relies upon habits of thought, it relies upon all sorts of processes that you're not aware of. And we're going to need to crack the code of those processes. It relies upon all sorts of processes that you're not aware of. Now, your brain is massively focused on saving energy because your brain uses a huge amount of energy, and it's massively complicated. So how does your brain know what to let into your system and what to filter out of your system? Well, it uses previously established aims and goals. So it lets stuff into your system that matches your aims and goals, and it kind of filters out, or it downplays, or it kind of reduces the importance of stuff that comes into your system which does not match your established aims and goals. Now, the problem is this. Your brain wants to save energy. It's big on practice. It's big on habit. It's big on doing things again if they work the first time round. So it's very easy for us to acquire all sorts of habits, tics, twitches, habits of thought, habits of speech. I shave the same way every day. I brush my teeth the same way every day. And it's really hard to actually shave a different way because I just fall in the habit. It's really hard to brush your teeth. Try it. Try brushing your teeth a different way. It's quite tricky, and it's quite tricky to remember. Habits are so important because they save energy. It's like they're programs that just get loaded and run. You know how to walk. You don't even have to think about it. Walking is incredibly complicated. You can do it. You don't bump into people. That's absolutely fine. Because that's what you always do. You use habit and pre-planned programs, behavioral programs, to enable you to get around. So, if you're suffering from panic, anxiety, depression, or stress, you have, in principle, been practicing believing that these problems are legitimate and, in principle, deserved to some extent. I never met a depressed person who didn't believe that they were deserving of depression. I never met an anxious person who didn't think that their anxiety was justified. Never met a worrier who didn't think, well, yeah, but what if it does happen? That'd be awful. It's much better to worry about it. So you might not like these things, but you also believe that they're somewhat justified in coming to you. Panic's a bit of an exception. But still, if you think the world is a dangerous place, if you feel threatened by the world, if you think that there's a lot of danger out there in the world, that is a pre-established aim and goal. Your brain is now going to filter things. It's going to let in information which matches your belief that the world is a dangerous place, that things are threatening, that things go wrong. It's going to allow that information in preferentially, and it's going to filter out information that disconfirms that belief. It's going to filter out information that tells you the world's perfectly safe. If you're depressed, if you believe there's something wrong with you, you're not good enough, you're a fraud, you're a failure, it's all going to go horribly wrong, you're going to get found out, you don't have any value, nobody cares about you, you've got no friends. If you believe any of that stuff, your brain is going to give you experiences that match what you believe about yourself, and it's going to filter out experiences that don't match those negative aims and goals. So now your brain is actually creating for you the experience of anxiety or depression or stress, and it's creating it in here, and it's in here that you respond. You don't respond to the external world, you respond to your internal representation of the external world, because that's all you've got. You can't respond to photons and sound waves. You can only respond to your construction in here. But now your brain is biasing your internal construction. And because you don't realize that there's code running, because you don't understand the processes that create these problems fresh every day, you believe, to some extent, that the depression, anxiety, are justified. And that tells your brain that this is what you want. If you say, yeah, well, I am a failure, I do feel like a failure, your brain will continue to give you the experience of feeling like a failure. Your brain is not your friend, and your brain in principle doesn't care. It doesn't care. Your brain doesn't care whether you live or die. Now you might say, well, there's a survival instinct. The largest killer of men under 45 in the UK is suicide. There is not a survival instinct. If you want to live, there's a survival instinct. But if you want to die, your brain will, in principle, facilitate your death. And so your brain is simply motivated to give you what it thinks you want. And so if you have been telling your brain through practice and habit and believing what your brain gives you that you're depressed for good reason, your brain will continue to give you the experience of being depressed. If you tell your brain, well, things are really frightening out there, it's very dangerous on the roads, etc., your brain will continue to give the experience of anxiety. So, if you believe, as I have laid out for you, that all of the information that comes into your brain is encoded, and that's straightforward, not at all contentious, that's basic biology 101. If you believe that your brain creates in here a virtual reality simulation of the external world that you can use, this is what you use to understand what's going on, again, biology 101, if you believe those two things, and if you believe that your brain filters out information because there is just such a lot of information, then you are now in a position to recognize that the encoding of information and the decoding of information is not always accurate. Here's an interesting question for you. Have you ever noticed that external reality seems more important for people who are not depressed and anxious than it is for people who are depressed and anxious? Depressed and anxious, and certainly significantly depressed and anxious people, are far more focused on what's going on in here than in what's going on out there. I've worked with hundreds upon hundreds, more or less 800 people, clients in clinical practice. And anyone who is depressed or anxious, they're far more likely to believe their internal representation, which is negative and threatening, than their external experience. So I might say to a depressed person, do you feel a failure? They might say yes. I might say, what is the actual external evidence that you are a failure? And they'll struggle, but basically there isn't any, typically, right? Yeah, but I feel a failure. So there's a disconnect between external reality, which has been encoded and then decoded incorrectly, So that the internal representation is as of being faulty, as of being negative, as of being a failure or something bad's going to happen. But the external representation or the external experience is that they're perfectly fine. They're no different from anyone else. So if you believe all of this, and I would urge you, if you don't believe it, just to check it out. It's Biology 101. You now have a choice. You can recognize that through practice, through habit, and through believing, well, through not understanding that your internal world is actually is a recoded version of external reality, by not understanding that and by believing the negative things you believe about yourself or about the world, you are, in principle, on a path to having the same experience every single day. Your experience is reconstructed every single day. And unless you change the programming, which basically means the processes, the numerous processes that create this internal representation, unless you change the programming, then your tomorrow will be the same as your today. I mean, variations, but in principle, it's not going to change. How can it? Unless you change the programming that lets certain things in and restricts certain other things, you're going to have the continued experience of being panicky, anxious, depressed, or stressed. So now, but you have a choice. You see, once you recognize that your encoding, your recoding in here is faulty, you need to do something about it, or not. So if you decide that everything I've said is true, but you decide not to do anything about it, that's fine. You're taking responsibility for your anxiety and depression. You're saying, well, I have decided now that I accept that I am depressed, anxious. These are options, but I have decided to accept these in my life, and I will continue to live as an anxious or depressed person. Fine. Brilliant. You've taken responsibility for your problem. If, however, you want a different kind of experience, if, however, you want to be, let's say, not anxious or depressed or stressed, well, then you've got to do something about it, because the processes by which you're panicky, anxious, depressed, or stressed are not mysterious. They're simply processes of faulty encoding and decoding that we need to understand. In principle, we need to crack the code so that we understand the processes, we understand why we have this experience every day, and we understand what we need to do to change it. Once you, if you want a different experience, you've got to take responsibility for that as well. You can't say, yeah, I wish I wasn't depressed, and then do nothing about it. I wish I wasn't anxious, but then do nothing. I wish I didn't have panic attacks. I hate panic attacks, but then do nothing, right? You've got to take responsibility for the action. So basically, you've got two choices. You can do nothing, and things will continue more or less as they are, or you can do something about it. Now, if you decide to do nothing about it, that's fine. I hope you found this video interesting. If you decide to do something about it, this is where I come in. I can be your guide. I can show you, I can illustrate all of the processes, and I can demonstrate that they're obviously working in you, right? I can show you all of the processes, or a lot of them anyway, that create your experience of panic, anxiety, depression, stress. I can illustrate them, I can show you them, and I can tell you what you need to do to change them. And then I can tell you how long you need to do it to bed it in and to have a different experience. That's my role. I will be your guide if you want a different experience. Now, your brain is motivated really to give you the experience it gives you through a lot of habit, through a lot of practice, and just basic repetition. But it's more or less repetition, the same kind of thing. When we start to crack the code, when we start to learn about the code and the programs and the processes, well, it only takes, in general, I'm going to say 10 minutes a day or less. So if you were to devote 10 minutes a day or less to cracking the code of panic, anxiety, depression, stress, then I think you could crack it. And probably, let's say within a couple of months, you'd be well on the way to having the code cracked. So my role, if you're interested in changing your life, is to be your guide, and I can show you exactly what to do. That's not a problem. But let me just add this extra thought. If you believe everything that I've said, and if you believe that everything I've said offers you a choice, and if you choose to take the choice, how far could you go, right? Everything that you experience is because it's being constructed in your internal virtual reality simulation, in your internal reality, right? So you might say, well, actually, I'd like to have more friends. I'd like to be sociable. I'd like to be wealthier. I'd like to be more successful in this or more successful in that. I'd like to do stuff. I'd like to travel. I'd like to whatever. There's no limitation. I mean, I'm probably not going to be a Hollywood movie star, right? That's a limitation. And I don't want to be, so that's fine. I mean, there are some natural limitations that, the external world places upon us. But there aren't, in principle, any psychological limitations. And these are the big ones that stop us from doing what we want to do. So we have the opportunity to craft, create, navigate through, and construct much, much, much more of the life that we want by decoding our experiences, understanding the processes are in action, and changing them, recoding them. Now, your brain, as I've said, is not your friend. Your brain does not care whether you live or die. Your brain does not really care what kind of experience you have. Your brain is simply focused on giving you the experience it thinks you want, that you tell it you want. If you tell your brain you want a different experience, and obviously it takes some time and effort, your brain will go, okay, it'll give it to you. My old dad, he's 99 and a half, and he would always say, oh, that's a lovely person. Oh, she's a lovely person. Oh, he was really nice. Yeah, I was really friendly. So, he'd travel on the train. He'd meet all sorts of people. Oh, they'd be lifelong friends. That he was running programs. He was running encoding programs that basically said everyone's nice and friendly. And his experience was everyone was nice and friendly. He was very popular. Well, he still is very popular, but mostly everyone he knows is gone now. So he's popular, and his experiences of life reflect the internal reality that he had. Someone else might be miserable and might say, well, people don't care about other people. And that internal reality will also come true. No one talks, no one shares, no one seems very friendly or outgoing towards him. No. So your internal reality reflects the kind of internal representation you create in here. Okay. If you are creating and every day refreshing an internal reality of fear and threat, then you're going to struggle with panic. You're going to struggle with feeling anxious. You're going to struggle to do anything which is outside of your comfort zone, which incidentally gets smaller and smaller as you go through time. But if you change that internal representation to one which is not threatened, which is one that doesn't think or assume something bad's going to happen all the time, and it takes a bit of effort to change it, of course, then you'll have the experience of not being anxious. And I love it when people come to my clinic and I say, what's been happening? And they say, oh, I forgot to be anxious this week. Yeah, brilliant. And that's how it works. You just forget to be anxious because it's not in play in your representation. You just forget to be depressed. Oh, yeah, I forgot to be depressed. Right? So you can change your experience. It takes a bit of time and effort. I'm going to say less than 10 minutes, 10 minutes a day or less, right? Over a couple of months, you can change your experience and you can have a different experience. And then, of course, to have the experience you want through your life becomes a bit of a life's work. You keep focused. If you want to be successful in business, you keep focused. If you want to be successful with friends and relationships, you keep focused. You can crack the code of anything once you understand the processes that the code is using. Okay? You can crack the code of anything and you can have the life you want. So, I know this has been a long video. You have a choice now. You can learn to crack the code or not. And either way, I wish you a happy and a safe journey. If you do want to crack the code, I look forward to being your guide. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.